of stuff to lay down as a good foundation to start from. And I think that will make a big difference in how we look at the book. And so that's the plan. And then, and as we go to, every time we do a study, I think, man, that really turned out good, and I'm encouraged and excited by it. And then I think, how do I do another one? And why don't I just not do another one because we ended well? I'm joking. But I just but it amazes me that God puts things in my hands. It really does. And this study is going to be a really good study. It's going to be hard sometimes, but it's going to be a really good study for all of us. And I'm excited about doing this together. And I'm like 3 weeks ahead of you, so I'm already, dealing with some of the hard parts of the study as I measure and think about look in that mirror for myself. So anyway, I hope that it's a good thing for all of us. So every time we go to Genesis, if we've been in church a long time, we can kind of check out because we know the story. And there's a few things in here that I had never seen before until I started digging into this lesson. And so I'm excited about looking at it and doing this together. So I was computer challenged last weekend. I have a new computer. I couldn't figure out my folders. I sent all the wrong stuff out. I sent this lesson out with all the answers, so I was so mad at myself for doing that. But so whether you looked at it or not, I don't know, but it's okay. So at the end, in Genesis 1:31, so we're going to spend most of our time there. We'll leave there a little bit. But what does Genesis 1:31 tell us God's view of creation is? Pardon?
It was very good.
It was very good, and that was at the end of the sixth day. And what did he create on the sixth day? Man, people. Okay. So according to, and so that's the only day he said it was very good. And the other days he said it was good. It was good. It was good. But the sixth day, the crown of his creation, was the creation of man. So let's read Genesis 1:26 and 28. And what was God's ultimate purpose in creating people? Let's get the answer from these verses. Would somebody like to read that?
Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every other and over every living creature that moves on the ground."
Okay, so what do you think from those verses was God's ultimate purpose in creation?
To fill the earth.
That was part of it for sure.
Rule over it.
Okay, to rule over it.
I would say fellowship with himself.
Okay, with him and
The Trinity.
okay, fellowship. So we do see fellowship talked about here in the Trinity, and this is again the first time something's mentioned. We can learn a lot, and we do see that here. But we're missing the one thing that he says in here that makes creation very good. And what is that?
In his own image.
Yeah, exactly. He made people in his own image, and the rest of creation is not described in that same way. And so by being made in God's image, what is that likeness, that image? What is that about people that he created?
We have a soul.
Okay, we have a living soul. And that's where that fellowship with people comes into it, Felicia, because he made people with a living soul. Okay, what else? So people are spiritual. God is spirit. God is spiritual. Spirit. What else? How are we created in the image or the likeness of God?
Him giving dominion over the earth is, I guess, kind of like a responsibility that.
Okay, so dominion over the earth, that's part of what he gave them. It was pretty simple what he gave them. Very simple what he gave them. But along with that, making man in our image, he gave us the power to think, to feel,
Free will.
to decide. Exactly.
I guess part of that dominion would be authority. So he has authority, but he also
Gave authority. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So he created people who are spiritually alive and able to meaningfully participate in the blessings of relationship with God. That's what he made. And in that, with holiness and perfect living. Okay, from the beginning of time, God blessed people. Where do you see that God blessing people?
From the very beginning, after he created man, he said they're good.
Yeah, he said they were good, and then he also actually uses the word.
Blessed.
Huh?
Blessed.
Yeah, he does use the word blessed, and that's part of the blessing. That's what you guys are hitting on up here. Is part of the blessing that God gave them was to be in charge and to have a family. And so that was part of that blessing. So, and he also blessed them how else? How did he bless them? And this is central.
Provisions, he gave them food.
He did give them provisions, that is true. And how else did he bless them?
He gave mankind dominion over the earth, because he says there in verse 28, fill the earth and subdue it.
Right.
You rule over it.
Rule over it and have children. That's the only two, other than don't eat of that tree, those are the only instructions that God gave them. Okay? So if you would say, if he wanted to bless people, what was their life like, their inner life like? We've touched on this a little bit. With the provision, he gave them a place of prosperity to live. I don't know how to spell that word. You're going to have to help me.
Prosperity.
What?
Prosperity.
E-R-I-T-Y? So he gave them prosperity to live. We're in Genesis 1, 26 through 28. And he also, Tessa and Nate are gonna fight you next week.
Am I sitting in someone's?
Just next week, Tessa's gonna take you down. I'm just saying. They got exposed to COVID. They don't have it, but they got exposed, so they didn't come because they didn't want to expose anybody
Let's
else.
sit there anyway. I want to see what happens.
Yeah, right?
It'll be entertaining.
Yeah, I think you should. Okay, she did say in her text, save us a seat in the front row. So,
Well, we saved her one.
yeah, one.
There's like there's like 4 more chairs right there.
Oh, Dan. Okay, so from the beginning of time, God blessed people. And we've touched on some of these blessings, but we haven't really touched on what was going on inside of them that was a real blessing for them. What was going on inside of them?
Gave them the breath of life.
Okay, they did have the breath of life, that is true. So they were spiritually alive.
Well, a relationship with God.
Yep. And because of that, and in that relationship with God, what did they have?
Love.
They had love. They had what else?
Security.
Security? What else? You said this word last week, Joe, and I thought it was interesting that you associated that with blessing, and they had peace with God, and they had peace with each other. And so along with that, there would be this contentment. Everything's right with the world. And that's what God gave them. That's what he blessed them with. Okay, the only other thing, just meaningful work. This would be meaningful work that they had.
Purpose.
Yep, purpose, okay? So what is, do you know what that, you don't know, but what, the definition of bless is the word Baruch, B-A-R-U-C-H. And it means bend the knee, which is really interesting in this context. Why that definition?
I guess it goes back down to humility, a representation of humility and what that, when you're in that position in life, it opens you up to his blessings.
Okay. This is the other thing that's so critical for us to establish, and that is rightly related to God. That was their posture in that relationship with God. They bowed the knee. And it was right. It was all they knew.
But that's the definition of blessed?
Yes, bow the knee. So there's an element of that in that blessing is that they knew their place.
Still
And they knew
willing to
God's.
submit.
Yep, they knew their place and they knew God's. And it took them to a place of worship and surrender, and it was normal, it was natural, it was all part of that. But that bow the knee, I never even looked at that before, I never thought about that, but because our blessings is a key word for us as we go through this study, that's the first use. It's and so it's interesting to find out that in the context of the Old Testament, that in relationship, everything was in balance. Everything was in the right order. And people lived in subjection to God, and that was natural and normal for them. Okay? So let's read Genesis 3, 1 through 7. And would somebody read that? And while we read it, be thinking about what is Satan ultimately challenging. That's my question out of these verses. What is Satan ultimately challenging?
Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, Has God indeed said, You shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God said, You shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Then the serpent said to the woman, You will not surely die, for God knows that in the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her and ate, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings.
Okay, so what is Satan's ultimate challenge to Eve? What's the challenge?
Question God.
Okay, to question God. And what about God?
He's challenging God's authority and position.
Okay? God's authority and position. And again, we just established that part of the blessing is they knew, and they experienced, and they lived that way. God's authority, what did you say, Elaine?
Authority and position.
I don't use that word.
T-I-O-N.
Thank you. Next song is memorizing.
Above Satan.
Okay. So they're challenging, what about other things about God? His instruction. And so he's questioning, is God telling you the truth in the instruction? Is God being truthful with you? Okay, and then what else?
He's actually saying that God's lying to you.
Yes.
He says you surely will not die.
Yes, he is. He's challenged. Yes, he's saying he's lying. And at the core of that, this is really important for us to pick out the core. What's the core of that? Everything we have here is true.
They're saying that they would be like God.
That's really, really important. Okay, who were they made in the image of?
They were made in the image of God, but Satan's saying if you eat from that tree, you will be at the same level as God.
You're exactly
so you'll
right.
be able to do everything He does.
You're exactly right. And so along with that, the goodness of God and what God is doing relationally with them. And they were actually made in the image and likeness of God. And he's saying, hey, you can be like God. It's like, wait a second, we're already made like God. Other than we're not God. But that was the challenge, was you can be without God. Okay? So what is Satan creating in the situation?
He's creating sin.
Yes, but before that, you're right. Doubt. He's sowing seeds of doubt. These are all new experiences. They've never experienced these things before. We experience these things as human beings all the time. Okay, so, and specifically, you'll be like God, what?
Know the difference
Know
between good and bad.
Yeah, knowing good from evil. What he didn't tell them is they couldn't keep evil at bay. And they couldn't hang on to good, independent of God.
Did they really know?
Well, that
what
was in the
evil
fine print.
was?
I don't know.
That's
No.
it's so weird to think. Like,
I know.
No, because the devil said you will know what it is.
But isn't that part of the mystery of the temptation? Is like, do we really know what all the temptations up front looks something, but what it delivers is something else?
Can you imagine the perfection of Adam and Eve? I mean, they were perfect. There was no, like we age.
Yeah,
And we,
yeah.
it was
Maybe just you, Brenda.
Speak for yourself.
You're welcome, Brenda.
I fired
my best friend now.
Yeah, right. No, you're exactly right. That's how we have to think, because that was their experience. Okay, so what attitude? Wait, let me see. Okay, by causing Adam and Eve to doubt God and His Word, what else would they doubt? We've kind of already said
They would start down everything.
everything. The relationship, what God is doing in relationships, and does God really love? And those are things that we human beings have dealt with ever since that point in time. Okay, so let's look at Genesis 3, and somebody read 12 and 13. And the question, what's the attitude at the heart of where they are right now? And the answer is found in how they respond to God.
The man said, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it. Then the Lord God said to the woman, 'What is this that you have done?' The woman said, 'The serpent deceived me, and I ate.'"
How do they respond?
Well, it wasn't my fault. It was his.
Yeah, exactly.
Blame.
Yep, definitely blame. And if blame is there, what's at the heart of blame? They're both blaming.
Conviction.
I think it's an avoidance of conviction, actually, because it's your fault. It's not my fault, it's Elaine's fault.
Well, we know.
Yeah. Right? Thank you.
Sorry, Fred.
Thank you for taking my side. Okay, so, but at the heart of me blaming Elaine, what is going on inside of me? This is also a new experience for them. What's going on inside of me if I'm gonna blame Elaine?
The opposite of
Okay, it is the opposite of accountability, but what motivates me to blame Elaine?
So the spotlight's
Fear?
not on you.
Yes? What is that?
Shame.
Could be.
Fear.
It's bigger than that.
Fear? There would be a little bit of fear.
Could be. I'm sure several things play in there, but there's a heart thing
You're
there.
trying to justify your actions.
Exactly. Why do any of us ever try to justify our actions?
You're right.
Who said it?
Right.
It's exactly
Carson said.
Carson. You're the man. No wonder
Gold star.
we're gonna count him
Just
today.
like Papa, right?
Nice.
So, at the heart of that is definitely pride. She can't say it's my fault. I did that. So what she has to do is, Satan did it. And he had to say the woman, so he's kind of blaming God even. So at the heart of this exchange, they're experiencing pride for the first time in their relationship with God. Okay? So let's look at Proverbs 16:18.
Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall.
How does that relate to what we just read in Genesis?
It was a case in point.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the poster right there. Yep, the fall. Pride came before the fall. Okay? And what was the second part of that, Miss?
Proverbs 11:2.
Okay, but 16:18, what was there's two parts to that.
Whoops. I already moved.
It's okay. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before stumbling. Okay, are you at 11:2? Okay, go ahead, please.
When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom.
Okay, so here we are, what's being contrasted there in those verses? In that verse, what's contrasted?
With pride comes disgrace.
Yep.
And then with humility comes wisdom.
Pride comes disgrace, humility comes wisdom. Okay, turn with me to Isaiah 14:12 through 15. This is a description of Satan here. And so let's pick out what is the core attitude of Satan himself. Okay? Isaiah 14:12 through 15.
How have you fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn? You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit.
So what is that declaration?
He thinks he's more powerful than God.
Yeah, and what encourages him to make that declaration? His pride.
Because the first two that were created, he already got them to turn their back.
Yeah, and that's how he tempted them. Really, at the heart was pride. And that's who he was, and that was his fault. Okay, so just so you don't forget Daniel, you're going to understand this verse in the context, I hope, Revelation 13. Turn there. Revelation 13, 2 and 4, and then verse 8. And we know this is future still in our time. We know those events were history, but let's read what Revelation 13, 2 through 4 says.
And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority.
Who's the dragon?
Satan.
Satan, okay.
And I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and that his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast, and they worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him?"
Okay, and I put, why, let's read verse 8, go ahead.
And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life, or the Lamb who has been slain.
So what is central to what is happening? We have the unholy trinity talked about in this chapter. We saw the beast, which is the Antichrist. We saw Satan, which is the dragon. We didn't see the third person of the Trinity because we're not reading that tonight, but that's the false prophet that he's also talked about in this chapter. So what is people's reaction to the beast, and knowing that the beast is energized by Satan? How do people respond?
They look to it in awe.
Yeah, they're in awe, and they worship, the power, and that's what he wants to have happen. And so when he said that in Isaiah, this is him trying to make that real here on this planet, sometime in the future from us. And we see pride continues to be an avenue that he uses, and that worship of him, where we saw back in Genesis, blessing meant to bow the knee, and that worship of God. Okay, all right, so let's turn to Romans 1.
Romans
1:18 to
I
21.
see it.
And these verses are really going to show us how little life has changed since the fall. Okay? And then then we'll answer these a couple of, listen, for why does man not glorify God? Why is man unthankful? Is there such a word as unthankful? Not thankful. And why is his heart and his imagination darkened? Those are the things we're going to dig into as we read here in Romans 1. Would somebody read 18 to 21?
The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God or gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened.
So think about that, and think of, where do we see pride? The word is not there, but where do we see pride in those verses?
We never gave thanks to him.
Okay. Why were they not thankful?
Suppress the truth.
Okay, they suppressed truth. Why are people not thankful?
Well, people are prideful. Basically you're saying that you can do it on your own.
Exactly. And that's part of the suppressing the truth. I don't need God. It's the same attitude that we saw back in Genesis, and the same idea of, I don't need to be thankful, I can do this. And we didn't use the word independence, but we certainly saw the independence in the garden, and we see independence in people now. And in culture, how is independence viewed?
It's good that
It's praised.
It's praise. And how about pride?
praise.
As long as you're tolerable with
Yeah.
your pride, it's praise, right? And what about humility?
It's
Makes
kind of
you
like,
weak.
That's definitely not look favorable.
Yep, that's exactly right. And why did man was made in the image of God and made to be in relationship with God? And so in that relationship, they would be in natural order of God being in charge, man receiving from God what they needed. That natural order would be there. So how would that fit into what we just read here in Romans? What people are not doing.
not honoring God with your actions.
Yeah, not honoring God.
Looking for their earthly desires.
And that becomes the supreme. And who wants to be glorified? What, Dan?
I was just gonna say, so basically, after the fall, Satan wanted to rebuild man in Satan's image.
I think that's
Corrupt.
close. Yeah, I think that's
Corrupt
fair enough.
man.
Yeah. And his poison was pride.
That was the first drug injection.
Yeah.
Then the rest of them came.
Okay, so who wants to be glorified? They don't want to glorify God. Who wants to be glorified?
Self-glorification. Yeah.
Well, in verse 20, it says that we don't have an excuse because what God has created is evident of his existence.
Exactly. And so
We
what?
just ignore it.
Yeah.
We take it for granted.
Or we come up with a theory
Yeah.
of a pastor's son came up with a theory that he repented of before he died, and we still teach it today. Darwin.
Here's what I found.
Sorry, Darwin. Darwin. And it's still the theory today that people adhere to explain away God and explain away creation. But God's saying you can look at creation and know someone did that.
Well, see, and it says in that last verse that we read that even though they knew God, they knew who he was.
Yeah.
They chose not to honor him or to give thanks.
Thank you for pointing that out. It's really important. And it's important for us to keep that in mind. Because if we're going to understand ourselves as people, we have to understand what's going on, what makes us tick as people. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Okay, turn to Proverbs 16:16 and 18:13, and God is going to tell us, in case we're wondering, how he feels about pride.
Yes, he doesn't like it.
You are so right. He used a little stronger word than that. I have a typo there. So would somebody read 18:13, huh? Surely not, exactly. Would somebody read 18:13? It's your fault, remember?
That's right.
What does 18:13 say?
He who answers before listening, that is his folly and his shame.
Okay. What would make you answer before listening?
Not listening to begin with.
Right. And why would I not listen?
Because you already know it all.
'Cause you're
Right. Thank you for noticing. Okay. So somewhere in 16, or I don't, he says he hates pride in every evil thing, and I'm gonna have to look it up because, I can't. Would somebody Google that so that we have the right verse there? It's not 16:16, obviously.
What is it?
It is that God hates pride, and it's Proverbs something.
It says pride goes before destruction.
It does there, yes, in 18.
That's 18.
Yeah. But there is and I have a typo here. It is that God hates pride.
Proverbs 8:13.
Well, that was close, right? Okay, so what is Proverbs? Somebody read Proverbs 8:13.
The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior, and perverse speech.
Okay, why does God hate pride?
Because that's what killed his first creation.
It was the first sin. Okay, or was it tied to the first sin? I don't want to split hairs because we could look at that in several angles. So it definitely was, and the enemy tempted them with pride. And what do we see today? We've kind of already said it, but what do we see today about pride?
It's glorified.
It is glorified. And how does it affect life in people?
It removes them from relationships with each other and relationship with God.
Okay, there's a division. A lot of times, a lot of relationships are divided because of pride. No question about that. We want to read Isaiah 53, 1 through 6, and we're going to stop here after we read this and have a little discussion about this. But Isaiah 53, 1 through 6.
Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of a parched ground. He was not stately, he was of no stately form or majesty, that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him.
Who's the him in there?
Him is Christ.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And like one from whom men hid their face, he was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed.
And so in those verses, I think it's 700 years before Christ, he's describing what? What does that sound like? It does. The scourging, pierced, and the crushing, and our sins falling on him, okay? Then it's important that we look at verse 6 and that relationship to those previous verses. And what do we find in verse 6?
All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him.
So how does that fit with those first 5 verses?
Well, there where it talks about him being that he was smitten of God and afflicted. They didn't esteem him. I mean, that's kind of what we do when we don't obey, when we don't
Okay.
have that right relationship.
Yeah, that's
When
true.
we make poor choices.
Yeah, that's true. But look at that 6th verse. What's key to that 6th verse? What's driving people?
Turn their own way.
Yeah. And what else? What's the other part of that? Gone astray? Each one has turned their own way? What is that?
Pride.
Pride.
I mean,
And so here in the context of the Old Testament of talking about Jesus dying on the cross, we can't disconnect that verse from the fact that that was the sin, the core central sin of man was pride, that he died for. Okay? So think about everything we've talked about pride. Think about that, and then I want you to think about what was lost then in the fall. Besides all the blessings that we know about, what was lost in the fall?
Innocence.
Innocence was, for sure.
Humility.
Humility. Humility, people to people, people to God. That's what was lost in the fall. So if you follow that logic, and we look at Isaiah and we talk about, and he's talking about redemption there. What's redemption? What's salvation?
Restoring order. What I heard.
That's what it is. Restoration of the order or humility to people in their relationship with God. Okay, we're going to stop there, but next week we're going to look at Jesus, and we're going to look specifically at pride and humility with Jesus, and then the following week we're going to look at what did he teach, and what did some of his followers teach us as we're on this same journey, and then we're going to go to Matthew 5 and start to look at those Beatitudes. Any thoughts, any comments you want to make? Besides Elaine is wrong. Have you ever thought about it that way? And there's a little book by Andrew Murray, and it's called Humility, and he really nails it. And I'm using that as part of a resource, and it's tiny, it's not a lot to it, but I would recommend anybody to read it. It's worth reading, and I feel like this is the perfect foundation, because how does Jesus start in Matthew 5? How does he start? What's the very first beatitude?
Poor in spirit.
Yeah, meek, they're poor in spirit, and then what's the next one? What's for the next one? I think it's verse 4.
Those who mourn.
Huh?
Those who mourn is
Yep.
the second one. Then gentle.
Okay. So anyway, the mourning, we're gonna get into these things, and we're gonna see how that's tied to that. And you read meek and lowly, right, Elaine?
Yes.
Jesus described his heart as being meek and lowly, and that's what we're gonna start next week. And we're gonna look at that and some other things and start to build like, okay, what was lost in the fall was humility. Now, what is Jesus restoring in relationship? And that's where we're gonna go. Anything else? What is the book?
The book on humility.
Andrew Murray, and it's Murray, I believe. Humility.
Could you send me the teacher's notes just to me?
I would.
Because
Yes, I will now, just to you.
because Elaine, she copied them and put them out.
She
And then
did.
when she realized that, she took it up, so I couldn't
Couldn't
cheat
look at
on
the teacher's
I
note?
couldn't cheat on the test.
Yes, Ed, do I have your email? I think it's a shared email. So that's something you're gonna have to figure out at home.
Maybe call me when you
Just
send
get the
it.
email
Okay.
first.
Yeah, I'll call you when I send it. Okay. All right, would somebody like to close?
Lord, thank you for giving us this day together to learn about, the beginnings of our relationship with you, where they started and where they've come from, Lord. Just be with us all this week as we finish out the week, and please God, protect us, Lord. Be with those prayer requests that have, sicknesses, traveling issues, and just be with us all and guide us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Thanks, you guys.
We can still go on and check it. You guys have a good rest of the week.
Yeah.